Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Business Line podcast. I'm your host Thomas, and we are discussing today the rollout of 5G with Prashant Singhal, who is EY Global TMT Emerging Markets Leader. Prashant has over 20 years of experience and advises some of the largest telecommunications conglomerates in the world, and has deep insights into all the exciting things that's happening in the world of telecom. So Prashant, thank you for your time and great to have you.
Thank you, Thomas, and great to be here.
So let me start with asking your thought at an overall view on, what is your assessment of how India is going about rolling out 5G services? We had this launch with big fanfare last year, and there was a lot of expectations, both from the user point of view and industries. We are almost now at July. So what is your assessment of where we are today? Is it as per your expectations or there's still some gaps left?
I think India has really done one of the rollouts have been very, very fast. I must compliment ourselves for it. Overall, government to make things happen, the operators who are investing heavily onto 5G, I think with almost 2.75 lakh BTSs, which have been installed, and that accounts for almost 12-13% of the total BTSs in India. I think it is fairly quick and fairly phenomenal, considering that the overall 5G auctions and the spectrum auctions took a long time vis-a-vis the rest of the world. India has done a fairly good job. Obviously, we need to see how things pan out. The adoption is happening. People have started using 5G. The speeds have gone up obviously in clusters where there is 5G. I think on an overall basis, so far, considering, less than a year, we went on post the auctions. I think we've done a fairly good job of the rollouts. I think in between there was a lull, as everybody knows, but then, there were all the stakeholders again got together, and then they start pushing in more and more on 5G. And this is considering the fact that, 5G, as of now, there are no new pricing plans on 5G. So it's not any different. There's no differential tariffs which are being charged on 5G, or there's no significant, or forget significant, but there's no return that the operators are looking at getting on this capex right now. They are providing this more from a customer experience standpoint, so that people start experiencing the faster speeds, low latency, trying to use it in different potential applications. But I think I would just say on an overall basis, we are fairly on track.
I think that's a good point that you're making, that within 6 months, we have reached where we are. And I was just looking at a report which talks about the base station rollout. So almost 2.7 lakh 5G base stations have been rolled out by first week of July. And of this, almost 1.3 lakh base stations have been rolled out in the last 3 months. So this basically fits in with what you're saying, that there was a lull and it's picked up. But the data also shows that almost 50% of these base stations have been added in 6 states. Largely, it's not a pan-India rollout. So is this kind of normal when it comes to new technology rollout, or do you think there is a concern here, with all the conversations around widening digital divide? So will 5G as a technology, as a network, be limited to top cities, or subsequently, as we've seen with 4G, it will start going down to other cities and rural areas?
Every technology rollout, happens with areas which are urban areas, which are potentially with users who are high data users or high voice users earlier, the high minute users, which were there earlier. When the operators also drive a business case or determine a business case for putting every new site or BTS on 5G or in the earlier times was 4G or 3G, it was all driven by, where do they expect the adoption to be faster? Where do they expect the handset to be available, the availability of the 5G handsets? And where would they see the adoption to be faster, and hence potential revenue growth which should happen. I mean, they are investing billions of dollars on 5G, both in terms of spectrum and in terms of capex. So one has to look at a mechanism of trying to see where you can get the return on your investment quicker. And that is the reason why you always look at high revenue contributing, circles, within that high revenue contributing cities or urban, and within the cities also the urban areas, or the areas where you find high contribution of revenues, and that's the way you start deploying the network, and then it catches up, right? It just catches up over. 4G has taken maybe, if you just go back, I think till 2016, 2017, we didn't have 4G, and then within 4 years or 5 years, the entire city has been, the entire country has been carpet bombed with 4G networks and with fairly reasonable speeds that people are experiencing. So this is the way every technology rollout happens. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we should be seeing more and more of spread out deployment of 5G across the country. It also has to do with the other parts of ecosystem being available, i.e. fiber for carrying such, high speed traffic, or at least for redundancy. The fiberization of towers have to be there. So I think, all the other things have to also fit in when you look at a 5G rollout as compared to a 4G rollout, in order to see a large pan-India rollout. So it's not unusual that you have 6, 7, 8 states seeing a faster rollout than the others, or within the states, as I say the cities. It's not unusual. It is very much usual, and that's the way rollouts are done. Not in India, but across the globe. Everybody starts focusing on revenue catchments, and then they do the rollouts with the rest of the countries and the circles.
So, Prashant, you spoke about revenues potential, and therefore these 6, 7 states and cities which are being rolled out. But my fundamental question to you is there a demand for 5G? So the reason why I'm asking you is this: from 2G, 3G to 4G was easier because you were addressing a market which was starved of broadband speed. So 4G brought in that additional speed which allowed you to watch Netflix or IPL on your phone. With 5G, the issue is that I have 5G, but as a user, I am not seeing any specific use cases or the need to have 5G. So the moment if tomorrow if my operator asks me to pay slightly more, I'm not sure if I want to pay more to get just 5G high speeds, because pretty much you can do everything today with 4G speeds. Recently, Airtel CEO also mentioned this at a public event where he was ruining the fact that there are not enough use cases, and he was exhorting the application developer ecosystem to come up with interesting apps which can ride on the 5G network. So both in terms of users, where as a user I don't see anything new in this other than more speeds, and from the operator's point of view, because you mentioned revenues, until unless I'm able to add value or create some new applications, how am I going to drive ARPUs just with speeds?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the first part is that the users get used to a particular speed or a particular way of access, right? Today, if there's a new highway which is developed, and let's just take the example of the Delhi-Jaipur or Delhi-Bombay highway, which has got a Jaipur. You can get to Jaipur from Delhi now in 3.5, 4 hours as compared to 5.5 hours. So you would prefer to go to that highway, or the Agra Expressway, which gets you from Delhi to Agra in less than 2 hours now. You would prefer to go there as against going through the normal route. The same thing happens in technology, where if you get used to a particular technology, you get used to a particular speed, then you experience that, and then you want to get hooked onto that. When India had 3G, there was no need for 4G, but when we started moving to 4G, we said we don't want 3G. Okay, and we don't want 3G because, not that we don't want 3G, but because of the experience of 4G, which gave us content much faster, which made some of the apps accessible much faster, which allowed us many more use cases to come in, and simple browsing or watching Netflix or YouTube or Spotify or whatever be it, all of that became much easier and much faster. Fast forward on 5G, now if the speed goes up many more times, the latency comes down and people get used to it and they get hooked onto it. So then, the 4G speeds looks to be very, very slow as compared to 5G. So the users do get hooked on to speeds, and that's the way technology always evolves and technology develops. It's not what the market is demanding where you start developing 5G or 6G or 7G. It is more that how you are getting the market to adopt a faster speed and become more and more efficient and productive as individuals and as businesses. So that's the first part where people will get hooked on to 5G. Second part, rightly so, that we obviously need to see more and more ecosystem of apps being developed. That we talked about AR, we talked about VR. So we need to see more and more of such use cases coming in. Gaming is a good example. We need to see that. I think when it came to Korea, China, I think that's the place where a lot of AR, VR has been developed. And I think that's what those kind of things have to come in from a consumer standpoint, for the consumer to start seeing the need also to go to 5G, other than the ones which are adapters, early adapters. The people that I know of in this market who have gone to 5G, now they don't want to go to 4G. I mean, they just say that 5G is like a bullet train. Why do I want to go to something which is less than a bullet train? So you get used to it. Question about whether they would pay more, I think, there would be always a divided house on this. There would be a strata of population which would pay more. There would be a strata of population which would not pay more. We should also not forget that India mein jo tariffs hain, they are the lowest in the world today. The per MB, I think we may be in the lowest 3 or 4, 5 countries in the world, or per GB we would be lowest. So even if the tariffs go up for 5G and they stay the same as 4G, even then you would not find people not paying those charges or higher charges for the adaptation to 5G. I think it's just how we evolve or how we mature the market into the technology. I mean, I'm just saying historically, if we just go back a few years, we had a challenge on the number of 4G subscribers, and now you find a large part of the country's population on telecom is on 4G. Yes, there's one of the other elements, which is the handset ecosystem and the handset pricing. So that has to come down. But with the scale and size of India, when we are looking at tens of millions of phones which are required or handsets which are required, in that scale, the pricing would come down even for 5G phones. And that would also drive adoption from a user standpoint. So just to summarize, yes, users get used to the technology because it is pushed into them. And once you get used to better experience, better speed, you don't want to go back to the old speed. And then the more and more apps being developed from a consumer standpoint, which is what the ecosystem should develop. Meta, we talked about metaverse a lot, but if your e-commerce companies or most of your digital companies start developing metaverse kind of experiences, now that you can't get on 4G, so that you have to get on 5G. And if you want to get that on 5G, then you have to adapt to 5G, and you have to experience that how you go into a virtual store, how do you pick up from a virtual store. If I want to pick up a soap, or I want to pick up a blade, or I want to pick up some groceries, I can do that, right? And that's a different experience altogether. Or it's going into a fashion store and picking up some clothes. And I'm talking about virtual stores. So all those apps have to develop. Absolutely. The faster it develops, more and more would be the adoption of 5G. But otherwise as well, people who are using 5G or people who adapt to 5G will never go back from 5G.
I'm sure you would be having conversations with global players, telecom operators, ecosystem players. How are telecom operators and ecosystem faring in other markets? Are there some breakthrough applications which have already been developed, and are telecom operators, say in the US or Japan, are they able to drive up their revenue just on 5G? Given the fact that Indian telcos have invested large amount of money both on spectrum and rolling out networks, at some point of time, they'll have to think about recovering this investments, right? So are there examples elsewhere where you can talk about where they are able to derive more value from 5G?
Very interesting question. I think 5G, we are all talking about 5G, but globally, if you just look at Europe itself, the penetration of 5G or availability of 5G is not more than 15% across Europe in terms of the coverage. In the US, it's about 26, 27% or north of 26%. As of now, there's no real killer app on 5G. It's largely to provide high-speed mobile broadband, which is, broadband is obviously on 4G as well, but better speeds which could be there on 5G. We haven't seen the revenue data showing a big uplift of revenues from 5G. I think it's very marginal, 1 or 2%, maybe 1 or 2%, which could be there. As I said, there are certain pockets of countries where you'll find, virtual reality, augmented reality. I mean, those are the kind of things that people are experiencing. It was also visible in MWC, a lot of these connected areas or AR, VR kind of experience that you have. You can just be on a roller coaster by just sitting somewhere and experience that. So you can do that. Has it moved the needle on revenues? The answer is no. But I think the differentiator for us in India, and will India play differently in this, is that most of those countries are already at a tariff which is fairly good or reasonable from a per GB standpoint. India is at a very, very low tariff. So will 5G help the tariff to go up? Or will 5G help, and I won't say tariff, but would 5G help the ARPUs to go up? Could be a combination of tariff, could be a combination of more data usage. And with more data usage, you start upgrading to a different plan. And once you start upgrading to a different plan, the ARPUs for the sector starts going up, and overall the industry benefits. We must say that all of us in India, actually, with 17, 18 GB per month per user, moving up, projecting that to 30, 35 in the next few years, we are all somewhere have misused the data which is available because it's so cheap. We are not disciplined in using data. We are excessive data users. We are excessive data guzzlers. Now, obviously, with 5G coming in, you'll see that because of the speed and because of low latency, you'll start consuming more and more data as well. Because the same 1 minute that you spend today or 5 minutes that you spend today, you'll continue to spend the same 5 minutes, but in 5 minutes you download much more than what you downloaded earlier. Or you'll read much more than what you did earlier, because you'll not have any kind of buffering, and your voice calls will move on to your WhatsApp, or they are already WhatsApp calls, but they'll move on to, let's say, a FaceTime call, or they'll move to more and more video calls, which would consume more data. So essentially, India could be different from rest of the world in terms of seeing a revenue uplift because of 5G, because we are fairly low on the 4G tariffs. But has there been a killer app? The answer is no. And I'm just talking about consumers here right now. There's obviously businesses and private networks, and we can talk about that a bit later. But we haven't seen really a big killer app or a big revenue. When I say big, we have not seen a double digit. We've just seen small single digit revenue jumps, which may come as a result of 5G in various markets. But India could be redefining the 5G situation if we start seeing the ARPUs going up with the advent of 5G.
Right. Those are interesting comments. Prashant, also one of the areas that I want your thoughts on is the way the overall market is panning out. So when you talk about rollouts, so essentially we are left with 4 players, of which one is state-owned, one is struggling. And then there are 2 strong players. And if you look at just 5G, you have predominantly a significant chunk of the rollout is just one operator, which is Reliance Jio. So is that kind of, I mean, there is a debate here about duopoly and monopoly and whether it is good or bad. Some say that, duopoly is not such a bad situation to be in, because, if you have 2 very strong players, then, they will be financially fit to roll out network and offer services. Whereas there is another camp which says that, if you have more competition, consumers will benefit competitive tariffs and all that. But what are your thoughts on the way, specifically on 5G market segment is spacing up in terms of number of players?
Size and scale of India, and not only India, I think if you just look at markets globally, and most of the markets globally, they may have started with n number of players. They may have gone up and down, but typically they all settle back at about 3 to 4 players in a market. And I think the recent mergers in the US of 2 large telcos has got the number of players down to 3 in the US now, 3 large players, apart from AT&T and Verizon. And so I would say that from an India standpoint, from the market dynamic standpoint, and I think that's also the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister, who's mentioned that multiple times, that India should be a 3 to 4 operator market. And I think that's good for the country. That's good for growth of the sector. And I think that's what we require. Nothing to do with technology, right? I mean, so every player eventually should play in every technology. So you shouldn't be having a situation where some players are playing in some technology and some are playing in the other technology. At the end of the day, they should provide the same service. There could be differential quality of service, which could be dependent upon the capex that they put, which could be dependent upon the coverage that they do, which could be dependent upon the fiber network that they have. But typically, people should be, or the operator should be providing the similar service on similar technology bands, which are there. And I don't mean the spectrum bands. I just mean providing 5G, 4G, 3 or 2G. 2G is now going away. 3G is anyway gone. So that should be there. And I think that's what the country really requires, and that's, as I said, is a stated goal and desire of the Honorable Prime Minister as well. And that's what we see globally. You see, pick up any market globally, you'll always find that there are at least 3, if not 4 operators who are there. There'll always be a market leader. There'll always be a strong number 2. There'll always be a third operator, which could be either niche operator or it could be a operator who's still growing and profitable. If you have to see a lot more investments, if you have to see a lot more experience for the consumers to improve, the tariffs have to go up. There is also this pocket of regulatory levies that India has, which is one of the highest today in the world. That has to be rationalized. Now, if we do these 2 things, an increase in tariffs, obviously not to a level which it hurts any of the consumer segments, but at least mark to market the tariffs and obviously mark to market the statutory levies, considering the amount of investments that the operators are making on spectrum and capex, then clearly, we'll have 3-4 operators who are finding good business cases for making investments and providing better experience and also choice to the consumers.
So one of the other things that I'm seeing a slightly different, playbook being adopted by different operators. So until now, we were told that lower frequencies is the best because, in terms of propagation and wavelength, they are the better. So everybody went after 800 and 900. What we are seeing in the 5G space is that the 700 megahertz is being taken by one operator and others are not interested. It could be a factor of the pricing and the floor price being expensive, but it doesn't seem to worry the other operators who are not on the lower frequency, which is the 700 megahertz. So how do you see this playing out? Is this entire physics of lower frequency, high frequency is not relevant to 5G, or are there other game plan or strategy which operators are adopting in view of the fact that the lower frequency is expensive, so let's do whatever we can with higher frequency?
Yeah, I think globally, the mid-band is the most sought after spectrum, right? The 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz band. And I think the ecosystem also has developed there. Equipment is easily available there. So I think that's really where the global is. And I think for us in India, it's not very different. That's obviously the most sought after band. Obviously, when you come to lower spectrum bands, the overall cost does come down in terms of capex, deployment, etc. But at the same time, the spectrum cost goes up. Every operator has their own strategy. I think there's nothing which is right or wrong. The good part about us now is we don't have to wait for multiple spectrum auctions, and that uncertainty of spectrum being available is gone away. Okay, there is clearly a path. The Honorable Minister of Telecom and Telecom IT and Railways, Ashwani Vaishnaji, has always said that he made that statement very clearly that every year there will be a spectrum auction which would happen. So if there is a requirement, the spectrum would be available. So if tomorrow, the operators believe that I need to get 700, it fits into my use case, it fits into my business case, then they'll go and pick up 700. And somebody may say, I want to start on 700. That's fine. That's really an operator to operator strategy. There's nothing wrong, nothing right in that. At the end of the day, we are saying, is spectrum now scarce? The answer is no. Is there an uncertainty about spectrum auctions? There's no uncertainty. I mean, if you just go back a few years, we didn't know when the next auction is going to happen. The 5G auctions by itself has taken so much of uncertain situation, right? Every year we used to hear that auctions are going to happen now, but it never happened. But now the government has clearly laid out a very good regulatory path to say that the spectrum auctions would happen every year. So then the operators can change their decision, or not change, but they can enhance their network with more and more spectrum in different bands as they like, and then roll out 5G there. But the overall concept of physics doesn't change, right? I mean, clearly the efficiency of spectrum at a lower band is there, but most adapted band today for 5G is the C band, which is 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz.
So you mentioned about 5G enterprise. There's been a lot of debate around that as well, whether telco should do it or should it be opened up for other players to start deploying that. But beyond that debate, what are the opportunities here? Is this kind of something really big where the revenue can kind of make meaningful impact for the telecom operators and other players in this segment?
Yeah, so I think enterprise clearly would be one of the areas where 5G could create a lot of efficiency, I would say productivity efficiency. But it's not just 5G, because 5G is only providing connectivity and low latency. So what needs to happen is, the use cases, the adaptability or the computing needs to be required, right? For electricity saving, you may create a solution as a result of which people can gauge when you're entering the building, when you're moving the building, based on that, not just sensors, but based on various tools and technology, and based on sensors which are deployed, which are talking on a real-time basis to the power grids within the offices, factories. One could end up saving 20%, 30% of their current energy bills. I'm just giving you an example. And healthcare, everything could be a connected hospital, a connected office, a connected hotel, a connected. So anything and everything can be connected. And that can happen through 5G. But what you really need are the applications which have to be developed by the respective vertical sectors in order to create that efficiency. To answer your question, is there an opportunity? The answer is yes, there's an opportunity. Is it large? Yes, it's large, but we should also not, the other part in India is that for us, workforce is in abundance, and it's relatively cheaper than the rest of the globe. So that innovation would help us in improving the productivity, which is great, and improving the efficiency. And then our workforce can get deployed elsewhere, and it could generate a much larger GDP for the country as a whole. So there is clearly an opportunity on the 5G private networks. It could, I mean, looking at the overall industry size, it could create a 4, 5, 6% potential opportunity, but that's fairly large if you look at the overall industry size. It's not a small number, and I'm talking about the overall telecom industry size, not the enterprise. And then with more and more data, with more and more applications around it, we could actually contribute back to the society in the form of greater efficiency, and also some of the better services to the rural India. We talked about surgeries, right? Remote surgeries. Now that can be a possibility with 5G, and there is connected hospitals, and there is remote surgeries which are available. I mean, just think about it. You don't need to get the doctors to fly in, fly out from one place to another place. People don't have to go there. So there would be a shift of expenditure, which today happens on travel, hotel, hospitality, etc., which could then move on towards these private networks, apps, because they provide that solution. So there could be a shift, and that could create a revenue opportunity. We are today at a very nascent stage or early stage on those, but it could, just because people are doing some pilots, it could spread. If we really see some good results in the next 12 months or so, it could spread. But it requires a complete ecosystem development, and not just a connectivity enabler. Connectivity is only an enabler, but you need to get the ecosystem to be developed, or you need to get the apps to be developed, or technology to be developed in order to get to a connected hospital, or a connected we talked about manufacturing 4.0. So you need to, or factory 4.0. You need to have all of that. This is only an enabler for making sure that you have the low latency with higher speeds available.
Interesting. But do you see all this of what you talked about, the use cases and applications, when do we actually see this? Because, the reason why I'm actually asking this is that every time a new technology comes in, I remember when 3G came in, there was a whole narrative of how life will change for everybody. Then 4G came. And it's been pretty incremental, except for 4G has increased speeds and newer applications. But the kind of application that you are talking about, where healthcare, where you don't have to travel and all, is this going to be real, or is it like a Mungere Lal ke Haseen Sapne, build a narrative and push the technology? When do we see these things on ground from a user point of view?
I hope it's not Mungiri Lal ke Hasin Sapne, because that is going to be very costly Sapne, not, not cheap Sapne. But so if I just go back, did anybody imagine? I mean, and it's actually 4G which has helped us to connect with each other and have all these virtual calls, offices, work from home. When COVID was there, it wouldn't have been possible without 4G. And then the use cases, obviously. So what do you say? Necessity is the mother of all inventions, right? So I think that is exactly what is going to happen here also. ये सब जरूरत के हिसाब से चलेगा, and यहाँ पे what will also happen is that we will see a push from every side, right? The telcos will start pushing, some of the other players will start developing the use cases in their respective verticals in order to go and solve the problems and create more efficiency. So I personally think, and India has that opportunity. India is very good on R&D. We all know that. So this could be defining for India, and India could actually lead the way for the rest of the world when it comes to solutions around private networks. I mean, globally as well, there are private networks. I won't say they're not, but it's not rampant, and India could make it rampant because we have the minds on technology. We have got one of the best talent pool for R&D. We've got one of the best. I mean, if you just look at, we've got all the tech giants, a lot of the global tech giants sitting in India. Now the connectivity which is available, we are creating the gears are also getting indigenously manufactured partly, and they're going to get more and more manufactured here. And then we have the scale for innovation. So I think we would see India defining it. I hope we see that. Otherwise, 5G investments are going to be very difficult to recoup. There is a government push as well to it, but we need to make it happen. It won't happen by itself. Had there been no COVID, we wouldn't have seen the adoption of 4G the way it has happened. So I'm not saying we need COVID, because that was very destructive for all of us, but we need to make that push for making the sectors start thinking about efficiency and productivity through the advent of private networks. And that has to come from a combination of telcos, IT companies, and the network players. And the consortiums are getting formed as we talk. There is initially it was a huge buzz. It's slightly tapered down, but people are working on it. And hopefully we should see some changes.
Great. On that note, we'll wrap this conversation. It was great listening to you, Prashant. Thank you for your time and your excellent insights.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much.